Thank you, Doug. What a wonderful introduction to today on collaborative care. I'd now like to invite our second speaker up, Dr. Sheila Silver, on intimacy and PD. Dr. Silver is a board-certified clinical sexologist in private practice in Portland, Oregon. She has a master's degree in marriage, family, and child therapy, and earned her doctorate in human sexuality. She is a trained sex counselor, group facilitator, sex educator, and has worked as a psychotherapist since 1988. Please welcome Dr. Sheila Silver.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Great. It's wonderful to be here with you today. The first thing I have to tell you is that I have no disclosures. They want me to say that right off the bat. We are going to be talking this morning about expanding our view on intimacy and sexuality. And the opportunity here is to realize that everything that I'm going to say is going to apply to everyone in this room pretty much and everyone listening. I'll be speaking about couples, all kinds of couples, whether you're a heterosexual couple, a same-sex couple, a transgendered couple. I'm speaking to everybody, but I'm also speaking to those of you who are siblings of a PD patient or adult child of a PD patient. You potentially are in relationships as well. And even healthcare professionals who are listening, there's something here for you. So we have a rich time together. I'm going to be speaking for about 50 minutes, and then we'll take about 10 minutes for questions. So I want to just very quickly go through with you just some very common things that happen for people who have Parkinson's related to their sexuality. Slowness of movement, tremor, and rigidity, of course, interferes with lovemaking. That's obvious. Reduced desire due to fatigue and medications is a very common thing that Parkinson's patients experience. Perhaps you have experienced that already in your relationships. Men struggle with getting or keeping their erections or reaching orgasm. Women may experience more dryness and pain or difficulty finding their orgasm with Parkinson's. But these last two in particular are also true for all of us as we age. So sometimes it's even hard to know whether this is related to Parkinson's or this is just related to natural aging. And so it doesn't really matter which it's related to. You have to deal with it anyway, right? All right, so for you as partners, you are experiencing challenges as well. You have changed roles, not just from being your spouse or partner role, but now you're in more of a care partner role or a caregiver role. That affects how you feel, obviously, as you know, in relationship to your partner. You have your own tiredness from taking on more responsibilities with more things to think about. That affects your interest in sexuality or just being physically intimate. You have your own fear, your own anxiety, your own depression or grief around the diagnosis and around what you're seeing in your partner. Sometimes you have a loss of sexual interest because of some of the symptoms related to Parkinson's. That's really normal and not something to be embarrassed about or ashamed about. It's very common that happens, and I'll be speaking more about that later. You also sometimes have an inability to read their nonverbal cues because of that facial masking that happens. So sometimes we communicate our interest in sex or our lack of interest in being intimate through very subtle nonverbal ways. And when there's masking happening in their face, then it's sometimes hard to read whether they're interested or not interested. And so that plays a role. And then, of course, sometimes there's just a change in your emotional connection because there's more stress and pressure in your relationship. All of these things are very normal. So I have a joke for you, which is a father talking to his children, and he says, you can get pregnant if you know. So if you know, then you better use a, Now, is that clear? Right, that's how all of us feel when we go to talk about sexuality. It's not comfortable. It's maybe not something that we've previously talked about with our partners before. For many of us, we haven't needed to. It's just sort of worked, or we've just kind of stayed away from the topic. But when you have a physical challenge, as you age, your sexuality has to evolve. And so it's going to be more important than ever that you are able to have these conversations. So you have to be brave. What hinders this kind of communication is either you've never needed to, you feel embarrassed about using some of the words, using sexual terms, you're afraid of hurting your partner's feelings, you might just feel hopeless, like this isn't going to change, why even bring it up? Sometimes intimacy issues predate the diagnosis. So it's something that's been in the relationship for a really long time, and maybe you know it's not related to Parkinson's, and so it's just easier to simply avoid it. So my first suggestion is to be brave, even though it's embarrassing, even though it feels hard to have these conversations. What I know about couples working with them for years, whether they are facing Parkinson's or not, is having conversations about their sexuality makes their experience so much better. It doesn't have to be sex maybe as you think of it, but just intimacy and talking about it in some way, and I'm going to give you some pointers, makes it better. But it requires bravery. So I title this Brave Conversations. The first important piece is holding the intention of becoming closer. That's the point of the conversation. And then communicating in an undefended sort of way. Being vulnerable, using I statements, not blaming the other person, but just saying, this is what I want us to be closer together. What I know is that when relationships are better through physical intimacy, you feel better as a person. It gives us vitality. And so I feel like this topic is so important, and I'm so glad I'm here with all of you, and so many people are hearing this talk today. So when we have these brave conversations, we're sharing our hearts. We're listening with curiosity to their experience, and we're sharing our experience. This is what I'm wanting. I'm wanting us to be closer. How do we make that happen? Coming up with maybe an idea, presenting a little step forward. Maybe if we did this differently, it might be helpful to us rather than just complaints is a good way to start those brave conversations. And being willing to ask for professional help from online, from therapists, sex therapists, or even just social workers, neurologists. There's lots of people on the team to ask questions about. So my communication tips are this. First of all, have a time and talk about it, not when you're in bed, but just saying, hey, I want to talk about us being more physically close. When's a good time for us to have that conversation? Especially with Parkinson's patients. They have good times of day and not good times of day. So you want to have a time when both of you are feeling comfortable having the conversation. You want to bring some ideas to the discussion. You want to be vulnerable. And you want to decide together what would be one small step in the direction that we want to take. You don't tackle the whole thing, but what would be one step in the right direction? And today I'm going to give you some ideas. How do we ask medical professionals? Because sometimes we have questions about medications. So I've given you just 2 examples of ways you can ask medical professionals what may be going on, because they can be sometimes so helpful, but they often won't bring it up with you. So things have changed for us sexually. Can we talk about that with you? If whoever you're talking to doesn't feel comfortable with that question, then they'll say, I'm not really the right person, but here's who you need to talk to. So it's a win-win, even if that's not the right person. Or asking what are the sexual side effects of the medications we're on. I've noticed a change in our sexuality just since my partner's been on this medication. Could it be related to our sexuality in some way? And hear what their thoughts are. So I think bringing it up with medical professionals, whoever's on the team, can be very helpful. You have a whole support, hopefully, a whole team of support. Medical doctors, physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, physical therapists, occupational therapists, social workers. Each of them, nurses, each of them have a different take on sexuality, on intimacy. Each of them can be helpful in different ways. So there's no bad or wrong person to ask. Ask any of them, whoever you feel most comfortable with, whoever you feel like you have the most rapport, or even maybe you see the most often. So my big point today is to think of sex differently, particularly for heterosexual couples. We tend to see sexuality in very performance function sort of ways, and we think of intercourse often. And my invitation to you is, even if that's not what you perhaps have done with your partner in a long time, to think about sexuality as sort of this buffet table of lots of different things that you could do with one another that aren't necessarily related to orgasm, that aren't necessarily about genitals, that you don't even have to be naked for, but they're ways of being close and connected. And so when you think about sex in a broader way, or just being physically intimate in a broader way, then it gives you more options. So many times couples will back away from intimacy because it doesn't look like how it used to look, so they just do nothing. And so today we're going to talk about ways of being close that doesn't eliminate the whole subject. So make all sensual and sexual touch pleasure-focused and about connection. Use more of your body to touch more of their body. It doesn't have to be just hands. It can be nuzzling someone with your face, or using your arms, or just running your body up close against their body. It doesn't have to be anything in particular that's necessarily even related to genitals. The idea is to let go of what am I supposed to do, what do we usually do, into what do I want to do? What sounds fun? When people talk about having difficulty with desire, I often will challenge them and say, maybe it's because you're thinking about it in a very narrow way. What do you have desire for? Do you feel like kissing them? Do you feel like holding them close? Well, sure, I feel that I have desire for that. Great, do that. So the question of what are you a yes to is a more helpful question than just I have no desire, or I just don't want to be sexual at all. Okay, so Barry McCarthy, who's a sex therapist in this country, has a great way of thinking about touch, broader than just intercourse, which is how a lot of people think about sexuality. He defines affectionate touch as non-genital pleasuring, with clothes on or semi-naked. It can be naked, but it's just connecting in a non-genital sort of way, holding hands, kissing, putting your bodies next to each other. Sensual touch, maybe the arousals between a 1 and a 3, and it could involve something a little bit more playful, but it's more like taking a bath together, or a shower together, or dancing together, or doing some massage. But it, again, doesn't necessarily involve genitals. It's just a more intimate kind of touch that might create a little bit of arousal. Erotic touch he defines as something that is creating a little bit more arousal. Again, it can involve genitals, but it's not necessarily completely focused on genitals. And it, again, involves varying amounts of clothing depending upon what the couple is interested in. Sexual touch, he's talking about more genital-focused activity, but again, not necessarily intercourse. It could include that. Not necessarily orgasm, but it could include that. And then intercourse or penetrative sex in some way is sort of the last one that he talks about. I'm sharing this with you so that you think about times with your partner. Maybe we just want first gear, and that's how we want to interact this morning or tonight or this afternoon or whenever feels like a good time. To just think about what am I a yes to? What sounds good to me? To not think about it as an all or nothing kind of activity, but to sort of broaden how you think about it. Okay, so some options, physical intimacy options. What I talk about no agenda pleasuring, I'm talking about there's no end goal. That's what I mean by no agenda. I don't need your body to be doing anything in particular. My body doesn't have to be doing anything in particular. We're just going to be together, pleasuring each other, and connecting with one another. It could involve kissing, sensual touch. I hear often couples talking about they give each other massages, but often they're very kind of functional massages. And I think that it's lost on not having some just sensual touch where you're just touching the person's skin, but it's not a massage. Do you understand the difference that I'm speaking about? So naked holding, that in itself could be really lovely. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Using your hands less and your whole body more to the extent that you can or you feel comfortable doing that. Touching with still hands means maybe I just want your hands on my arms or on my thighs or on my hips in some way, and I don't want them moving around. Often, sometimes when couples touch each other, hands are moving a lot, and sometimes that's sort of too much. And so it's okay to just say, I love your hands on me, but I just want them really still. The giver-receiver exercise is a wonderful exercise that I share with couples around having one person be the giver, and maybe you do this for 10 minutes or half an hour, whatever time frame feels good to you. But it's the receiver who asks for the kind of touch they want. The giver is just offering what's being asked. What couples learn about each other when they touch each other in this way is we sometimes give the kind of touch that we want. So if you like really light touch, then that's typically how you touch your partner. But they may like more firm grasping. So that's why the receiver in this exercise is the one who asks moment to moment what they want, or maybe for the entire 15 minutes, I want you to do X or Y or Z. So, and then you switch. And you're now the receiver if you were the giver, and you get to ask for whatever kind of touch you like. The advantage of this is the person who's giving the touch learns a lot about that person, especially if the receiver can give them, that feels great, I'd like it even slower, can you do it even lighter? Giving them tasks to ask for rather than, oh, I don't really like that. There's not a lot you can do with that. So asking for what you want, moment to moment, so that the giver is giving exactly the kind of touch you like. You learn a lot about your partner with this. All right, let's keep going. Sexual activity should be holding each other, feeling each other's breath and spirit and body. This is somebody you're in love with, somebody you're spending your life with perhaps. And so it shouldn't be about a goal, a certain something has to happen at the end of our time together. I just want to be with you. That's what you're trying to communicate in your touch. Make affection a destination. This is so important, and you can think about the 5 gears of touch that I was talking about earlier. What do we want our gear to, what destination are we headed for? What kind of gear do we want to be in together? And to talk about this before you even get started, so you're on the same page. Emotional intimacy options is also a really important topic, and I'm just going to cover it really briefly, but it's an important topic I didn't want to leave out. Having fun together and not just doing appointments and self-care stuff and house and responsibilities stuff, but having fun where you're laughing and playing and doing something enjoyable together is very important in terms of feeling close to your partner. Sharing a joy and a challenge, something that's more from the heart and not just about logistics, which is sometimes what couples do a lot. Stepping away from technology, turning off your phone, stepping away from the TV, and just having some time to just be together on the couch or on a walk. Using appreciations frequently. This is something that gets lost often in long-term relationships. Speaking about, I love that you made, even if it's the simplest thing, that you made coffee for me this morning, or you remembered to make that phone call to make dinner reservations. Thanks for that. I appreciate that. I've been married to my husband for 31 years, and we do this a lot during the day. And I think if somebody listened to us, it would seem odd, but I have never not wanted somebody to appreciate me for even the smallest thing. So it's a small thing, but it's a wonderful thing to embed in the relationship. And then emptying your frustration and anger tank periodically. This is especially important for care partners. We do get frustrated when they have limitations, when they're not listening to us, when we have good ideas, when we often nag. And so we need to take care of ourselves. We need to go to a therapist. We need to go run. We need to go talk to our friends. Whatever helps you empty out so that you can come back to your person feeling a little bit more refreshed, a little bit more less frustrated. Again, what I like to say in connection with this is, what are you looking for? Are you looking for the things that drive you nuts? Or are you looking for the things that you love about that person? Whatever you're looking for, you'll find. So it's really valuable if you can try to look for the things that you appreciate and love about that person. De-rolling and just being a couple is so important when being sensual or sexual with your partner. Not being, you're the patient, I'm the care partner, but just being Mary and Bob or Sue or Jane or whoever you are. Just being you. And this can be challenging. How do you take off that role and step into something that's not the role that you live in all the time? So, role changes. I think it's important that you understand, and I know you probably already do, that change in your role affects how you relate to that partner. And I know we're going to talk more about that later today. So you need to look for ways to take a break from that role. And you need to look at what would help you take a break from that role. To mentally and intentionally say, okay, I'm clocking out for the next hour. I'm just going to be Joe. I'm not going to be the person who takes care of you. For an hour, you can step out of that and just be yourself. So what do you need to touch back into being a woman or a man or into your lover energy? So I'm going to talk a little bit about making physical intimacy a priority so that you can plan ahead of time. Okay, I know we're going to have some time this afternoon, or I know after dinner we're going to create a little time. So what do I need to do leading up to that that's going to help me approach that time and feel more ready for it? People often say, well, intimacy should be just natural and spontaneous. But what I know is that for many, many couples, it just doesn't work out that way. Our lives are so busy with responsibilities and family and appointments and a million things. So putting it on the calendar, I'm actually a big fan of. I think it's really important. Sometimes people say, well, that takes the fun out of it. But it doesn't. If you have a party on the calendar, if Christmas is on the calendar, it doesn't take the fun out of it to know that it's going to happen in 3 days. You get excited. You get prepared. You start thinking, okay, what do I need to do to get ready for this thing that's happening? So I think there's great advantage to putting it on the calendar and saying, okay, on Thursday morning or Thursday after we get home from our plans, we're going to spend some time doing this and having collaboratively planning something together and having some ideas about how you're going to spend that time. And then noticing what you allow to get in the way. Desire. I want to speak a little bit about this because I hear this so many times from caregivers, that desire is just really hard to access. And this is true often with postmenopausal women. We in particular often are people who have responsive desire versus spontaneous desire. What I mean by that is spontaneous desire is I'm walking down the street or I walk in the door and, oh, I feel like being sexual with you. Men have more testosterone in their bodies, so they often have more desire that's just they feel naturally. For many women, we need something to respond to, and then we feel our desire. We don't start with desire. We start with doing certain things that help us get in the mood, or we may be thinking about something that maybe sort of arouses us a little bit, or we read something that arouses us, or we watch a movie, or our partner just starts touching us. And then we're like, oh, that feels really nice. Now I'm actually feeling some desire to go further with this. That's responsive desire, and that's really normal for women. And so what's important is to just know that about yourself and then start thinking about what helps me get into that more of that openness and willingness, knowing that I just need a willingness to start, and then my desire is going to kick in later. So looking at what would help you have a willingness to start, and looking at what you do want to do rather than what you don't want to do. Arousal begins when you activate accelerators, things that help you. maybe taking a bath or a shower or putting on something that feels really good with your body. I have some clients who just use a special lotion or a cologne or something that reminds them, oh, this is that time when I'm going to be with my partner. And so even just a smell or a candle will help people sometimes get more in the mood. Those are accelerators, things that turn you on. Then knowing your brakes. What are things that get in your way? Being sensitive to that, knowing what that's true for you, and trying to eliminate those. If you need a lock on your door, or you need to make sure you're not going to get interrupted, or no one's going to hear you, or whatever you need to do. I have a great story about this relating to my husband, who many, many years ago, when we were trying to be sexual in some way, and I just had a million things on my mind, I said this to him, and he said, well, he gets a piece of paper and a pen, and he goes, well, tell me what's on your mind. And I'm like, okay. And so he starts writing it down. I'm like, well, I'm thinking about my mom, and I'm thinking about our kids, and I've got this, and I've got to make brownies tomorrow. And he starts just writing it all down. And then he looks at me when I'm done, and he's got quite a long list. And he says, I get it. I get why this is really hard for you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this with me. So it gave him so much more empathy for what I was trying to do, the hill that I was trying to get over. So I felt closer to him already. And then by him writing it down on a piece of paper, then I could let it go. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't such a big thing. But I was trying to keep it all in my brain. So something as simple as doing some journaling, making lists, whatever you need that will help you show up more in your body and in a more relaxed and peaceful place. So knowing what your breaks are and trying to minimize those can be very helpful. Bridging time is that time before you start. And so some people, they need 10 or 15 minutes. Some people need a half an hour. Some people need an hour or longer. But what do you need to let go of your day, to let go of the responsibilities, and just drop into your body and wanting to be with that person? I have some couples who need to have a conversation first about what they appreciate about each other. They need to feel emotionally close, and then sometimes it's so much easier to be naked with that person or partially dressed with that person. So giving yourself that bridging time if that's what you need. So I'm big on communication, talking beforehand. What gear do we want? What do we feel like doing? I feel like doing this. What do you feel like doing? How do we collaborate in that way? Having that conversation. Then talking during, saying what you do want, what would make it better, instead of complaints or I don't like that or that doesn't feel good or I don't want this. That's not helpful information. You want to set them up for success, and you want to get the kind of touch that feels good to you. So it's not a critical thing, it's a helpful thing so that they feel successful. So even just a few words or some kind of communication that helps them give you the kind of touch that would feel good to you is important. But again, it may not be something that you're used to doing. And then debriefing. I'm actually a big fan of debriefing. It says on this slide, people don't learn from experience, they learn from reflecting on their experience. How did that feel? So what this looks like is maybe after you've been sensual or sexual with your partner, that later that night or the next morning or 2 days later, what do you want to talk about in relationship to what we just did? Maybe it's a highlight. Like one of my favorite things that we did was that moment when, and here's some conversations after sex that kind of might help you. For example, one of my favorite parts of last night was X. Sometimes it's a surprise. Like I've heard couples in my office, when I invite, let's say, the husband to say, what was one of your favorite parts of the last time you guys were intimate? He might say, I saw her taking her clothes off, and it was so beautiful. And she was so surprised when he said that, because she would have said that his highlight was something very different. So there's great value in actually asking your partner, what was your favorite moment and why? And also saying, next time I would like to do this different. I realized I wanted to say something and I was too embarrassed or shy or whatever to say it. So saying that later, even if you couldn't say it in the moment, can be sometimes really valuable. asking a question. There was a moment when you closed your eyes or you put my hand to the side, and I didn't know what that meant. Tell me more about what happened in that moment. Sometimes we assume what something means, and we're wrong. So asking that question can be very helpful. The one at the bottom says, I thought you liked this, but you didn't seem to today. So is that just today, or is that something I thought you liked and you really don't like? That's a valuable thing to know. For many women, what we want today might not be what we want tomorrow, but that doesn't mean we don't want it to ever happen again. And a lot of miscommunication sometimes happens between couples without talking about that. So was that a no, not now, or not ever? Asking that question is really helpful. So the question to ask yourself, particularly as a caregiver, is what are you doing to help yourself? Emily Nagoski has this great book called Come As You Are about desire. And she says feeling stressed, depressed, anxious, self-critical, untrusting in your relationship, or simply exhausted and overwhelmed are all real and meaningful barriers to sex. This is something that everybody in this room probably experiences. And so what are you doing that's going to help you want to be and actually be more physically intimate in a way that works for you and feels comfortable to you? If you're interested in finding a sexuality specialist near you, my recommendation is to go to the website of the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. These are sex therapists who are very comfortable talking about sexuality and aging if you're an older person, but they will help anybody, and they may not know a lot about Parkinson's, but they probably do know quite a bit about aging and evolving your sexual pattern. So they can be very helpful. If there's no one in your area, you can often Skype with someone. Many sex therapists do that. They do intensive sometimes with couples. I have that happen in my office all the time where people come from other states and they spend a weekend and we have like a couple of sessions the first day where I meet with them as a couple, and then I might meet with the one person on their own and the other person on their own, and then we come back together and we brainstorm some ideas of what would help move them closer towards where they want to go. And we might have 5 or 6 sessions sort of in a weekend where we're looking at what's the problem, how did it evolve, and what might be good solutions. Clothes on, it's just talking, and it provides them a chance to share feelings and ideas. I want to speak just very briefly about hypersexuality because it's something that often can happen with Parkinson's patients where they're on a medication that increases compulsive or impulsive behavior. And so I get questions on this. So distraction or redirection of energy can sometimes be helpful when somebody's compulsive or impulsively acting, just changing the direction and focus can sometimes be helpful. Evaluating what they might need that may not be sexual. Like it feels like they need sexuality specifically, but when I sometimes ask these patients, what else would feel really good? What other ways could you connect with this person that might meet some of that need? They have ideas. Sometimes sexuality can be together, but it doesn't have to be, so sometimes just solo sex might be appropriate for that person. And definitely talking to your healthcare team if that's a problem in your relationship is very important. So I give you here some suggestions of starting a brave conversation. And when I use brave conversation, I'm thinking about this is not a topic that you maybe feel comfortable with or that you've had an opportunity to talk with your partner very much about. So my invitation is either taking a picture of this slide so that these are some journaling questions for you. My invitation would be that you journal on some of this on your own and answer these questions for yourself and invite your partner to answer these questions on a piece of paper, on their computer, on their own. And then at a time that you agree on, come together and let's have a conversation. So my favorite way you touch me is sometimes that can be very surprising. And if you know what their favorite way is, you can do more of it. One thing I would like more of is whatever it is. One of my favorite sexual experiences with you was, this is a great conversation, because often, even if it's 30 years ago, it doesn't matter. What was exciting about it? Why did you like it so much? What was so good about it? There's often themes or seeds or clues in that experience that you can bring back, like we were in a very unusual place maybe, or I was a little afraid we were going to get caught and that made it seem fun. So whatever it might be, or you seemed like you looked at me so much more than you normally look at me. Whatever it might be, the answer to that third question could give you information about what you could potentially bring in more of in your experiences now. What I liked about it was, one thing I commit to doing more of in the future. So what do you know already? Even as you sit here, as you're listening to me, what are you knowing, I really could do more of this. What's your break? Why don't you do more of it? And what would help you? What would help you do more of something that you know your partner likes? One thing I would like you to do differently is, this is an undefended communication. This is a way to talk about your experience and to get information from them about what their experience is that can be very helpful. So your intimacy recipe here is, begin with a conversation, focus on connection and pleasure rather than performance and function. Don't get caught up in what your body's doing or not doing, whether you're aroused, whether you have an erection. Don't worry about any of that. Just focus on, I want to connect with you. I want to be close to you. How can we make that happen in a way that works for you and works for me? What are you a yes to? What am I a yes to? It's a collaborative conversation. And include yourself. Many times, especially with Parkinson's, we're adjusting or accommodating to what they need or want, and we leave ourselves out of the equation. It's very important to include yourself. It's very important to think about, what do I need? What's going to help me get ready for whatever we're going to do? And inviting them to share with you what they need to be ready. If you're the higher desire person or the lower desire person, that's going to affect the conversation. But including yourself and being focused on connection and pleasure. So my summary before we get to questions is, expand your definition of sex. Think of it as that buffet table. There's lots of things on there. If there isn't a lot of things on there, talk about that with your partner. What else could we do? Do we just have this very narrow breadth of things that we do, and we have let some things go over the years, or we've never even tried some certain things, or I thought you didn't like that, so that's why we never do it? Having a conversation about what could be on your buffet table that's not necessarily sexual focused, but it's sensual focused. It's somehow being physically close and connected. That's what you're looking for. That's what belongs on the table, along with all the other things perhaps that you already do. Communicating with your partner, having conversations ahead of time, right before. So I'm differentiating that, like a conversation when you get home today or in the next couple of days, and then a conversation before you have your little planned intimacy time, and then talking during, if that's appropriate and it feels right and it's helpful, and then debriefing. All of that communication is very important. Practicing it with you, with each other. Sometimes saying ahead of time, sometimes I want something different when we're together and I don't quite know how to phrase it. Give me some suggestions. How could I tell you that I want this a little differently? And then including your healthcare team in solving some of these issues. Sometimes it's medication related, the tiredness, or the on-off periods, or whatever may be happening, desire issues, erection issues, all of those things. talk to your healthcare team. They can be of great help to you if you have the courage. I'm trying to train more of them to bring it up with you, but if they don't, you have every right to ask. This is part of your humanity. This is part of who you are as people. So it's very appropriate. All right, we have some time for questions. Happy to hear from anybody in this room or anybody watching. I know that some people are going to be submitting some questions online, so it's kind of an open format. I think there are some handheld mics. There's one over there. There's one over here. So feel free to just put up your hand if you have a question, and I think they will just feed me the questions that are online.
We have a question from our internet audience.
I'm sorry. Oh, I see you there.
Yes,
okay, thanks.
Most sexuality books are written for younger people. What is your favorite book on sexuality for older adults?
Okay, so I don't know, did everybody hear what he said? He was talking about my favorite books. I have a long book list. But for older couples, a lot of sexuality books are primarily written for younger people. My two favorite books for older people, one is called Naked at Our Age by Joan Price. Naked at Our Age by Joan Price. Price, P-R-I-C-E, like the price of a bag of potatoes. Joan Price. Naked at Our Age. It's easy to get on Amazon in paperback. It's a helpful book for people who are wanting to kind of look at senior sex and how do we evolve our pattern and what things have we not thought of. The other book that I really like is called Sexual Intelligence by Marty Klein. Sexual Intelligence. Marty Klein, Marty is M-A-R-T-Y. Klein is with a K, K-L-E-I-N. Marty Klein also has a book about porn. His Porn, Her Pain, I think is the name of that book. So if porn is an issue in your relationship, that also might be a book that might be helpful for you. Great question. Thank you. Other questions?
We have additional questions from our internet audience. I am a caregiver of a person with PD, but I am not their spouse or partner. What are ways I can create more emotional intimacy with my father?
Great. So for those people who are, their Parkinson's person is either their father or their mother, they're an adult child taking care of their parent, emotional intimacy is an important aspect of caregiving. Seeing that person, not just as a patient, not just as work, but as a human is very important. And so there's several things that need to happen. One is, how much do you know about that person? How much do you know about their life? Have you thought about asking them what they remember about their childhood? What their teenage years were like, who they were as a young adult. Many adult children, some adult children know about some of that, but many don't even ask that question. And it rounds out your perspective and your viewpoint of that person. You see them in a more broad sort of way, which I think can be really helpful in caregiving. You're not just seeing them older and in need of care, but you're also seeing them as a more well-rounded person. So that's one thing. Another thing is what I spoke earlier about in terms of your own frustration tank and anger tank and all of that. Self-care is so important, and you're going to hear that again and again today. But it's particularly, I think, important for adult children who may also be taking care of younger children of their own, or pets, or neighbors, or whoever. So that caregiving role can be so taxing. And so I think we have to be so mindful of not just pushing, but also realizing that we need to put our own oxygen mask on first before we really are going to be effective caregivers. Because if we're caregiving with a chip on our shoulder or feeling angry and frustrated, that person feels it. and it absolutely affects your relationship with that person. So being mindful of your own emotions and doing what you need to feel better, physically and emotionally.
Hi.
Hi.
What do you do if, when you approach your partner or approach your medical team, and they want nothing to do with this conversation, and they shut you down? Where do you go from there?
Great question. Wonderful question, because that's not uncommon either. So for your medical team, there's different answers. For your medical team, if you raise the question and they shut it down, it's often due to their own uncomfortableness or their lack of knowledge. They do not get trained in medical school, for many of them, about sexuality. And it's unfortunate, but it's very true. So there isn't a lot you can do. I would say keep asking. Whoever you encounter in the Parkinson's world, keep asking. Keep asking in support groups. Keep asking other medical professionals, looking online, trying to get information, if it's medical information, in every way you can. If it's with your own partner who doesn't want to talk about it, there's a couple ways you can approach that. One is that you can say, I notice when I bring this up, you don't want to talk about it. And that's okay. I just want to understand that better. Help me out. Tell me just a little bit more about why you don't want to talk about it. Instead of talking about it, let's talk about why you don't want to talk about it. Sometimes that can be really helpful. If somebody's feeling enormous shame because they don't feel any desire or because they're not achieving erections or whatever's happening for them, it's so painful to talk about that they'll shut it down. But I think the way in is sometimes just saying, what's happening there? Maybe they'll still shut it down. That's possible. But they may just say, it's just too embarrassing, or I'm just feeling guilty that I'm letting you down, or who knows what will come out of their mouth. But then if they even say something, then you can say, I think there's still a way, even though your body's doing what it's doing, that we could still be close in some way. And I have a couple ideas. Do you even want to hear my ideas? So it's going into it very gently, seeing if they will share a little bit about what's happening for them, and coming to the conversation with, I would love to just hold you more. I would just love to feel your arm around me a little more, whatever it might be. So you're making a suggestion that feels pretty non-threatening, like they don't have to do much to be able to maybe meet that. And then it calms their physiology and they're not so nervous about the conversation. If they still shut you down, then they don't want to have the conversation.
We have some additional questions from our internet audience.
Yes.
How do I find interest when I don't see the person in a sexual way any longer?
How do I find interest when I don't see the person in a sexual way? Which is so common with Parkinson's patients. As the disease progresses, their symptoms are more obvious. And it doesn't even feel sometimes like the same person that you married or began a relationship with. And so finding interest and desire can be so challenging. And so there's a couple of things that I want to say about that. One is it that you're just not looking at that? You're like what I was saying earlier about what you're focused on. Are you only focused on the stuff that's about their Parkinson's, and you're not noticing their smile or the light in their eyes or their hair or just how nice it feels to have their arms around you? So A, what are you focused on? That would be one question I would have. And then B, I would say if you're noticing that sexuality just is not where you want to go, and you're a no yourself, then looking at your touch needs, your physical needs. Is there some way that even in a non-sexual way, you actually would really appreciate them with their arms around you and just spooning each other? is there a way just watching TV, just holding their hand would feel really nice? And so can you take physical touch and connection, physical intimacy out of the sexual realm and just in touch needs? I think we all need that. There's great studies about, I don't know what it is, 7 hugs a day or 11 hugs a day is so good for our oxytocin and the chemicals in our body. And so looking at, is there ways that you can get some of your touch needs met in a non-sexual way that feels close and connecting? Thanks. There's a question right here in the center of the room.
What if it's just the opposite, to where the caregiver's not in this wanting the sex, to where it's more him or the other partner that's all they think of?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
Okay, well, okay, I'm the caregiver to where my husband is Parkinson's patient,
Right.
to where he is overly sexual, to where that's what he wants. And it's
Right.
not about being held, it's about the intercourse. To where it's just the opposite for me, to where that's not where I'm at.
Right. So sometimes it's the person with Parkinson's who has more desire or interest, and it's the partner who's struggling with interest or desire. So you have to look at, is it that they are simply coming on too strong, and if they approached in a different sort of way, you might be more open to it. That could be. So there's some education of each other that needs to happen. Again, a conversation of, I would love to lay with you, but the way you do this doesn't work for me. So here's some ideas that would work better for me, because I want us to be close. So sharing the same intention, but giving some pointers of what would work better for you can be really helpful. Yeah. And then just again, as I was talking earlier, if they came in a more gentle, softer way, what do you need to be even interested to have holding happen or kissing happen or something? So it's looking at your own interest and your own accelerators and brakes and all of that. What kind of time do you need to get ready to kind of enter into that? If you have a little bit of arousal going, then it's a little easier than if you're starting at 0. Often couples, they expect their partner to do sort of all the work and turn them on, and I think we have to take responsibility to kind of get our own pilot lights started and sort of see, what do I need to actually be interested in even beginning? And so that's something that maybe you can take more ownership for and look at. But I think giving some feedback to your partner of, I love that you want me, and what would work better for me is this or that or the other. Hopefully they can respond to that.
Additional question from our internet audience. Can you talk a little bit about the physiology of not being able to achieve orgasm in persons with Parkinson's?
Again, it could be aging, because not being able to find your orgasm, whether you're in a male body or female body, is something that is not uncommon as we age. But certainly for Parkinson's patients, sometimes medications make it a little harder to find orgasm. And I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a doctor of sexuality, so I'm not the right person to talk about the physiology of that. But I know that it can happen, and it can be incredibly frustrating for any of us to get really close and sort of not be able to find our way there. What I know for some people that can be helpful is sometimes backing off a little bit with stimulation and changing gears of what you're doing and then coming back to it, and that somehow pressing forward with too much intention almost is self-defeating, and it makes it harder. But it's also, it's not an uncommon problem, and so I think the way to think about it is not that that's the hallmark of a successful interaction, of going into the interaction saying, it might happen, it might not happen, but not being so bent on it happening. And then if it happens, great, and if it doesn't happen, okay. But that's a small part of the interaction. So to really appreciate everything that happens prior to that moment is also really important. Have we connected? Do I feel closer to you emotionally? Do I feel more bonded to you? Do I see you? Have we had a lovely time together? Those are lovely hallmarks for a successful experience. Bodies do what they do, and sometimes we can find our orgasm and sometimes we can't. And that's actually really normal. Thanks.
Another question.
Sure.
My partner's drive faded before his diagnosis, and it feels awkward to address now in this new world of Parkinson's. What advice can you give me?
I didn't hear the first part of that question.
My partner's drive faded before his diagnosis, and it feels awkward to address now in this new world of Parkinson's. What advice can you give me?
Oh, sexual drive. I'm like thinking driving a car. I'm like, I don't know. I'm happy to talk about driving if you want to talk about driving. So sexual drive was kind of low prior to the diagnosis. Was that the question? Okay. Yes. So sometimes our experience of drive, I don't know if this person is male or female, but sometimes women define themselves as having low drive, but it gets back to that thing that I was saying earlier about responsive desire. Like women actually often don't walk around with a lot of drive as it's defined in our culture. That's actually not normal for us, but there's an expectation that we're supposed to. So my curiosity around that is, okay, it's totally fine that you don't have drive, but what do you know about yourself? What are things that help you feel a little more in your body, a little more relaxed, a little turned on? What are things that you know about yourself that kind of get your pilot light started, that you can do on your own, whether it's reading a romantic novel or shaving your legs or whatever it might be, to just begin to know more about yourself and know that drive or desire comes in response to something. So it's realizing, what do we need to do to then be more responsive? What will help get us started? So that's what I would do, and I think that's a great conversation to have with a social worker or a sex therapist or something like that, to just help. I do that a lot in my office, talking to people, and it's so different for each person, but looking at what helps you have more interest and willingness to maybe take your clothes off and even just do some naked holding together. What would help you be interested in that? You just need really a willingness, but often women and men sometimes don't go into those experiences because they think it's leading to something that they don't want to lead to, so they don't even do that. And so that's where having a conversation and saying, I just want to lay in bed and hold you, and that's our destination. How does that sound to you? I don't want you to have the expectation that it's going to lead to anything beyond that. Let's just be with that. And I think that is the reason that so many people back away from sensuality and sexuality, is where it might lead. It seems like it's a roller coaster that you're on immediately. And so my invitation to people is to say, no, it's stairs that we can choose to go down step by step or not. All right, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for your listening and attention.